Our moderator today is Thomas Folland. Dr. Folland is starting this fall as an assistant professor in the Department of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Iowa. His research interests lie in the coupling of long wavelength infrared light to optical transitions in dimensionally confined quantum materials through the use of surface phonon and surface plasmon polaritons. Thomas, I'm going to turn this webinar over to you now.
Excellent. Thank you for the introduction, Bob. Good morning. I'll be moderating the webinar today on how to land a faculty position from application to interview, with a focus here on research-intensive academic positions in the US. This is the second in a three-part series on the faculty application process organized by the MRS Early Career Professional Engagement Subcommittee. The goal of this webinar is to provide a complete outline of the application process for research-intensive schools in the United States. We will talk about the faculty search process, the documents that make up an application to an R1 school in the US, and what you can do to make them stand out. We'll then also talk about the interview process and the steps involved in that, as well as briefly touch on how offers are made. Our speaker and panelists will then talk about what they look for in applicants at each step in the application process, and then finally we'll open up the panel for the Q&A. I am joined in this session by three panelists who are here to provide insight into the faculty application process in their various institutes. So Dr. Peter Crozier is our main speaker today. Peter's a professor in the School of Engineering and Matter, Transport and Energy at Arizona State University. He has extensive experience in developing and applying advanced transmission electron microscopy techniques to problems related to energy and the environment, with special emphasis on electroceramics, catalytic materials, and atmospheric aerosols. I'm also I'm also joined by Dr. Andrea Tao, who is currently a professor in nanoengineering at UC San Diego, where she serves as Vice Chair for Education, Deputy Director of the San Diego Nanotechnology Infrastructure, and co-PI of the brand new UC San Diego Materials Research Science and Engineering Center announced by NSF earlier this month. Her research interests lie in the discovery and design of self-assembled materials at the nano to mesoscales, with a special focus on new materials for plasmonics, where light is propagated, manipulated, and confined by nanocomponents that are smaller than the wavelength of light itself.
Hi, everyone.
And finally, I'm also joined by Dr. Kane Jennings, is the chair of the Department of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering at the School of Engineering at Vanderbilt University. His research efforts are aimed at the molecular design and fabrication of smart surfaces and materials, many of which mimic, replicate, or employ highly functional biological systems. So at this point, I'm going to turn the webinar back over to you, Bob, so you can play the video.
Hello, and my name is Peter Crozier. Hello, and my name is Peter Crozier. I'm a material science professor at Arizona State University, and I'm going to chat with you about how to land a faculty position at a research university in the US. So I'll take you through some aspects of the process, the application process, and what to do if you're lucky enough to get an interview. So, of course, the first question you want to ask yourself before you apply to become a professor at a research university is, what does that job entail? And most of you are probably aware of that. I'm guessing that most of you have studied your advisor, your PhD advisor, your postdoc advisor, and of course you know that people obviously spend a lot of time working on research, classroom teaching, different types of service activities inside and outside the university, running conferences, giving conference talks, etc. And of course, mentoring graduate students and postdoc. And one of the things you'll see that I've written after each one of these is fundraising. We spend lots of time writing grants. Research is an expensive game, and graduate students and postdocs need to eat, and so you have to be prepared to spend a lot of time trying to raise resources. And it's not necessarily a bad process. It's challenging, but you should, ideally it would be nice if you could enjoy doing that. The life of a professor at a research university is it's more of a vocation and a lifestyle than it is a 9-to-5 job. You definitely need to have a fire in your belly and a strong determination and drive for success, and so it's fairly long hours. You probably have watched your advisor working evenings and weekends. The nice thing is, though, that you have a lot of freedom to structure your own time. So you can achieve a work-life balance. Work tends to blend into family life and domestic life much more, but you have complete control and flexibility over your working hours. And in many ways, I think of it as being a privileged position. I get to play on these electron microscopes all the time. And once you get through the tenure process, you have a high degree of job security, very important, especially these days. And of course, we enjoy what we're doing. The process of trying to fill a vacancy, a faculty line at a university, it's worth understanding how that occurs. So the university decides they want to fill a faculty position, and the first thing they do is they establish a search committee, and that's populated typically with 4 or 5 faculty members. The position will then be advertised. Sometimes they're targets of opportunity, but typically they'll be advertised, and typically many hundreds of people will apply. The search committee will review all the applications and reduce that down to some sort of shortlist. At Arizona State University, we typically reduce it down to 6 to 8 candidates, who are then, we then give a telephone interview of those 6 to 8 candidates, and then we reduce the shortlist down to 3 to 4 candidates who are invited onto campus for an in-person interview. Now, the first thing that you need to be aware of this committee is that it's not homogeneous. There are many different opinions among committee members, and so it's important that you put on a pretty polished performance and not make any mistakes, so that someone who may be not keen on your candidacy but keen on somebody else's candidacy can't take advantage of that slip up. So once you've discovered this position that you think you're interested in, there's really at least 4 documents that you need to prepare. There's a cover letter, a resume, a research plan, a teaching plan, and then sometimes there are additional documents like, for example, diversity and inclusion plans are often required now. And so one thing that you need to remember is if typically 100 to 300 people apply for this position, you might want to ask yourself, how long do you think each committee member will spend reading your file? So if we just say, for example, suppose there's 150 applicants, and each application is probably 20 to 30 pages long. If I spend 15 minutes reading each one, then that's 38 hours of time. So it's a fairly enormous amount of documentation to read. So typically what committee members will do is they'll scan the applications quickly, and if there are typos, format errors, grammar mistakes, poor writing, poor layout, then your application will be gone. We're basically, with 150 applications, we're looking for ways to eliminate them, to reduce that down to 6 to 8. So you have to put yourself in the shoes of one of these committee members, and so your materials have to be prepared at a very high quality. Your overall strategy for trying to apply for a position is that you really need to land an interview. So you're really going nowhere until you get an interview. And so there's really two overall application strategies that people use. There's this so-called mass mailing, where people will send similar applications to lots of schools. It always surprises me that so many people do this. It's a bit like playing the lottery. I think people think if I send 50 or 100 applicants, I'm bound to get invited to an interview for one. And you can get lucky if your application lands in just the right school at just the right time for just the right position. I'm sure it sometimes does work, but not very often, I would say. The applications that are more likely to be to land you an interview are the ones that are highly customized. So each application is customized to the school, taking into account the size of the school, research areas, the degree options and combinations. Of course, these applications take a lot more work, but I think you're much more likely to make it to at least the telephone interview stage, or maybe even land an interview. So I think it's a lot of work, but it's more likely to get you an invitation to an interview. The cover letter should really not be too long. I think a good cover letter is really about 1 page. It should, of course, be customized to the job. If you have some special qualification that makes you really well matched to a particular position, it's worth highlighting that in the offer letter. So if the position is for an electron microscopist and you really have a lot of experience in electron microscopy, then you want to make sure that's mentioned. Or if you're a specialist in density functional theory, you want to bring that out. So you want to make sure that's brought out. Now, of course, there are opportunities for mistakes here, especially people that do mass applications. Make sure you get the name of the search committee chair and the institution correct. There's nothing worse than, I'm chairing a search committee and the letter is addressed to Dr. Smith or something like that. That really doesn't make a good impression. And if you do that, then, that's your application going in the garbage can. So you really need to check the details. It doesn't matter how fabulous you are. As I say, if the details are wrong, they tend to dismiss your application immediately. The resume has to be accurate and it has to be very professional. So I think that you want to pay attention to the style and structure. It should be very easy to scan quickly. It should be easy to find specific information about your background. It should be detailed and precise, so don't be vague about it, be specific. And it should again be tailored to the position that you're applying for. So make sure there are things that you can bring out that are relevant to that position, then do that. Of course, most of your resume won't change very much, but maybe 5 to 10% of it might adapt to the particular position. And I talked to a colleague that recently went through this, and he agreed to let me show not the details. I blocked out the person's name, but just to let you see what a professional resume looks like. It's amazing how many people submit resumes that are really not well put together. They're full of mistakes and they're very difficult. They're not well, there's not a good use of subtitles or a hierarchical structure. And people just can't, they're frustrating to read. So again, it doesn't matter how talented you think you are. If you don't present yourself well in the application packet, you're likely to not get an interview. So here's just a few of the things. Again, this is not, you would obviously put down your qualifications, education and postdoctoral experience, a brief description of research experience. And by the way, sometimes people put a long laundry list of techniques that they know. I would say that if I see more than half a dozen techniques listed there, I think that they really don't know anything about anything. So I think, you can't really be an expert on 20 or 30 techniques. Just because you've had some exposure to that technique doesn't mean you're an expert. So be very careful about how you list your research experience. We're looking for your depth of experience and depth of understanding and competence in particular techniques. We don't care that you've had exposure to 40 or 50 different materials characterization tools. awards and recognition, invited presentations and seminars, journal publications. Now, people often ask about, journal publications, how important is the number of publications and the impact factors and citations and H indexes and all these kind of things. There's not really one rule I can give you, except that people are really interested mostly in your first author papers. So, if you're a co-author with 10 other people and you have many, many papers like that where you're like author number 5 and you've got 20 or 30 papers like that, I mean, that's fine, but it doesn't indicate that you've taken an intellectual leadership in any of those projects, whereas someone that might only have, 6 or 8 papers, but their first author in all those papers, that really is something that tells me what that person is able to do. So I think you have to really focus. I would say the most important thing in your resume is the number of first author papers, as opposed to citations and H index and things like that. List journal publications that are in preparation. That's important. It tells me that you're really moving things forward and that you're not only publishing stuff that your advisor pushes you to publish, that you're taking your own initiative to publish. Peer-reviewed conference proceedings, additional conference presentations. Leadership and service is important as well. What kind of leadership and service are you doing? It might be organizing a symposia. It might be peer review of journals. I should make this a bit bigger. Maybe founding or program chairperson for something, running seminars, some sort of outreach program. You might not have done any of this, but if you have done leadership or service, we're interested in hearing about that. Teaching and mentoring. Of course, most of you have done some teaching assistantship position during your PhD, but we're interested in other things as well. Did you mentor undergraduates in your group? If you're a postdoc, are you mentoring graduate students? We're interested in things like that, because that shows an interest in teaching. Research interests and memberships in societies, and then, of course, references. So it's very important that this resume be prepared in a very professional level. And as I say, it needs to be very easy. And it needs to be straightforward to access information. So please use subtitles a lot to define the sections. The worst type of resume is one that's just solid text. It's difficult to get through and not very easy to find things. Research plan, you should put together a research plan. Typically, I would say, outline maybe 3 to 4 general topics that you're interested in developing a research program in, maybe 1 page per topic. Committees are not interested in reading 20 and 30 page research plans. This is not supposed to be a proposal. It's supposed to be your research plan. So you should be able to keep it short and succinct and well written. Again, it needs to be professional and include lots of figures. And it needs to state exactly what you're going to do. So don't be too vague. Of course, you need to state at a high level, but you also need to tell us what are you actually going to do in that area. Things that the committee will look for here is, is this just a continuation of your PhD? Are you going to be competing against strong people in the field? Because that means that your probability of getting funding might be a bit lower. Does this demonstrate intellectual independence and leadership? Does the candidate understand how to match a project to different funding sources? So you need to demonstrate that you know what kind of projects will the DOE fund, what projects will NSF fund, the Army, the Navy, NIH. You need to have some understanding that all these federal funding agencies don't fund the same thing. And is there a long-term vision in your research plan? And again, I won't, most of this is blocked out, but basically, a research plan might look something like this. You would have some sort of general statement of principle, of what you're interested in, what's your vision, and then project number 1. And then you might first give 1 phrase of why it's innovative and what the impact will be, and then some narrative with figures. And then, project number 2. And then this particular person put in a separate section on funding sources, how they would fund different projects from different sources. You can do that, or you can blend it in, and then references. So I think, again, it needs a lot of effort and time. You want to think very carefully about the research plan. The teaching plan should, remember, you're applying for a university position. Sometimes people think, even though it's a research university, that they don't need to be interested in teaching, but actually you should have some interest in teaching. If you're really not interested in teaching, I would suggest you not go to a university position. You should go to maybe a government lab or something like that. You should articulate a general teaching philosophy that communicates your excitement and positive attitude towards teaching. I think that some of the specific things would be, check out the specific degrees and curricula of the department. It's pretty bad if you go for an interview or you do a telephone interview and you're talking about teaching courses for degrees that are not available at the university. That's really not good, and that sometimes happens. Demonstrate knowledge of degrees and courses, very important. Go to the web page, find out what the curriculum is. Explicitly state what courses you would enjoy teaching in the curriculum. It doesn't need to be the whole curriculum, but say what things you would be most interested in teaching. And then if you're interested in developing new courses that are aligned with your research interests, then we're definitely interested in hearing about that. So let's suppose you get lucky and you get a telephone interview, first of all, and then maybe an in-person interview. Then it's very important that you do your homework and that you learn about the school before you start doing telephone or in-person interviews. So you should talk to the host, usually the committee chair, to find out what the expectations are for the interview process, especially what the expectations are for the seminars. And again, do your homework, make sure you know the name of the department in college, what degrees are being offered, what city the school is in. I can tell you that I am at Arizona State University, which is located in the Phoenix metro area, and we have had, I remember a few years ago, one person on the telephone interview told us how he was looking forward to moving to Tucson, Arizona, and he spent about 5 minutes telling us all about Tucson, and we eventually had to tell him that the job was not in Tucson, Arizona. So again, that's, as you can imagine, that was not an impression, not a favorable impression, obviously someone that's not paying attention to details. What research is performed, and also what shared facilities, what are the supercomputer facilities like, expensive equipment like microscopes, etc. What kind of shared facilities do they have? You want to make sure you educate yourself on that. Now, if you go for the in-person interview, the most important thing is the seminar. You must get the seminar right. And so it's very important to plan, prepare, and practice it carefully. This is not something you want to be casual about. One thing that I think you should understand is that many faculty in the department may not read your application in detail. You might just scan it very quickly, and very many of them will make a decision on whether to vote in favor of you being offered the job based on the seminar. Okay, so basically that seminar carries a lot of weight. And the things that faculty are looking for would be evidence of really good communication skills, because that's teaching, right? The seminar's a proxy for measuring how good you are at teaching. Technical mastery of your subject. The ability to think on your feet, basically at questions, how does the person handle questions? And also evidence for technical weakness, dishonesty, or integrity issues, plagiarism. And one thing that comes up, especially if you've been involved in a lot of large-scale projects where there's many, many authors on every paper, people will want to know exactly what your intellectual contribution has been to that paper that has 10 or 20 authors on it. So be prepared to answer very specific questions about what your role is on these large collaborative projects. So again, the most important thing is to talk to the host, but a rough guide for the seminar, you should prepare 45 to 50 minutes, definitely no more than that. The worst thing is to have an interview seminar go on for like 60 or 70 minutes. That's really not a good impression. Probably 30 to 35 minutes should focus on your prior research experience, and maybe 15 minutes on research and teaching plan. The way that I usually recommend people do it is a broad introduction that students can understand, assume that there are non-specialists there, Then go deep on a few topics that demonstrate your technical mastery of certain areas. Make sure your research plan includes discussion about resources so that people get that you understand how funding works. And then, of course, you want to mention also something about your teaching plan and what courses you want to teach. For the questions, listen carefully and try and respond as best you can. It's okay if you don't know the answer to something. You need to try and stay calm and professional and polite. And lastly, it takes a lot of practice to give a good interview seminar. So, if it goes wrong, don't beat yourself up. I always tell my students that are interested in this, be prepared to do lots of interviews before you finally get it right. And sometimes, that's just how it goes. Now, and then, of course, you'll have one-on-one discussions. So if you're talking to faculty, be enthusiastic about the position, show interest, make sure you've read up on who they are. It's good to read up on that. You usually will get the schedule a few days before. When you talk to the department head and the dean, talk about teaching requirements, especially in the first year. Make sure you understand the tenure process. Startup packages, talk to people about how much money you're likely to get. The start date, how long it will take the university to make a decision about who's going to get the offer, and then there are other things like when you go for the interview, you might want to check out the place, make sure you like the school and the location. So if you do get an offer, usually the offer will be made to you first of all verbally. There'll be, the university will go over, well, here's what we're interested in offering to you. That's your chance to negotiate. And make sure that you see a draft of the letter where all the things you want are put in writing. Now, sometimes administrators are not able to put something in writing, not because they're trying to manipulate you, but there are just some things we can't put in writing. You might get a verbal agreement. You just have to remember that those verbal agreements are not binding. So if there's something really, really important to you, my recommendation would be that you get that in writing. If you can't get it in writing, then just be prepared for the possibility that the school may not be able to honour that. Lab renovations and construction can often take years, no matter what department heads tell you. So just be prepared for operating in a sort of unideal lab situation for the first couple of years. So that's really all I want to say to you. I know that there'll be chat and questions, and I know that some of my colleagues on the panel will have other things to mention as well. And so I'll look forward to responding to your questions. Thanks very much.
Thanks for the talk, Peter. That was really, really great. Before we move on to the general Q&A session, I'd like to give our other panelists an opportunity to just add any other comments they might have on top of Peter's presentation. So start with Andrea. Do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, first of all, I think Peter did a really great job giving a broad overview of the faculty search process. And I just have 2 points that I'd like to emphasize. The first one is related to having some knowledge about university and system-specific requirements for the faculty hiring process. And for those of you who are maybe coming from international schools and may not be familiar with what I'm referring to by system-wide, I'm typically referring to public research universities that are state schools that are all operating under a common system. For example, University of California is encompassing my university, UC San Diego, as well as Berkeley, Los Angeles, and other places. And as an example, within the UC system, diversity, equity, inclusion is actually considered a 4th pillar of how faculty are actually judged, not only for hiring, but for the tenure process. And so recognizing these university and system specific requirements can be really helpful during your application packet preparation, especially when you're trying to tailor your packet to a particular job description. And the second thing that I'll emphasize is something that I did not appreciate until I was on the other side of the hiring committee, which is that not all faculty searches are created equal. Read the ad carefully to gain information about the specific job that you're applying for. For example, even a job search that's run through the same department in the same university may have very different requirements for that particular search. And again, just to give you a quick example, my department at UCSD, we went through a hiring process this past year, and that particular decision-making was actually subject to a second committee that was run through our engineering school. So not every job will have the same requirements, even if it's for a faculty position in the same department.
Thank you, Andrea. Kane, do you have anything to add as well?
Yes, I do have one thing I wanted to go into a little bit, and that's really be aware of what your, let's say in your field, whether it's materials or chemical engineering or chemistry or whatever, be aware of the what the conference in your field is providing toward the faculty search. And not all disciplines do this, but there are some in engineering, particularly in my field in chemical engineering, where we do a lot at the annual meeting in the fall. So it's a good idea if you're applying to chemical engineering positions to have your application submitted before the fall meeting. Some initial panel review of applications will occur before the meeting. And then we will actually go to candidate talks at the conference. There's a whole poster session, usually with about 300 faculty candidates. It is a faculty candidate poster session. You know, it's a great way for us on the committee to go and meet some of the folks that we've already reviewed their application and they look pretty strong, and now we just want to see them in action. So that's something, again, not every discipline offers that, has that, but a few of them do, and be aware of that if you're trying for those positions in those fields.
Thank you, Kane. So now we'd like to move on to the Q&A session. So we had people submit questions in advance. So thank you very much for everyone who did so. So we'll start off by going through a few of them before I also touch on the ones that have been asked during the session. So to start, I've got first question will be, will it affect the strength of my application to take some time between finishing a PhD and applying for academic positions? For example, time in postdocs or industry. Does where I choose to do a postdoc matter? I have been told that doing one at a national lab is a bad idea for an academic career path. So maybe Peter, would you like to start answering this question?
Yeah, I don't think there's a general answer to that. I would not say that doing a postdoc at a DOE lab is a negative in terms of applying for a faculty position. So I think we're looking for the person to have the ability to be a self-starter, to run their own projects. Going to industry depends where you go in industry. I mean, there are some companies where you can really demonstrate a great deal of expertise. And if I think of some of the appointments we've made over the years, we've offered people that have been in industry for maybe 10 or 15 years faculty positions. So I don't think there's no simple one-size-fits-all answer to that. It depends very much on the individual, and it depends on maybe what the university is looking for and how effective that person has been in the industry position or the government lab position. I don't know if my colleagues would like to add something.
I would definitely agree that it is applicant dependent. And I think especially for people who are deciding to go in a different direction for their independent faculty research, having a postdoc can be quite important, especially if you're trying to get training or trying to be introduced into a new community that you aren't familiar with or you weren't familiar with as a graduate student. So having those postdoc years can be very helpful. I've never been on a committee where it's been looked down upon to have a postdoc at a national lab or at a federal agency. And I think especially in engineering departments, having a strong connection to industry is very useful, especially when part of our job is trying to place our students in the right career path and trying to train the workforce, the national workforce. So having that connection to industry is actually quite a positive thing in many cases.
And I agree with Andrea and Peter as well. I think that captures what I'd like to say.
So another question. So can you comment on how your career looks now versus how it looked on paper when you were applying? Did you stick close to your proposed research plan, or did it deviate? So Andrea, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. I have not looked at my proposed research plan since I actually applied for faculty positions over 10 years ago. I think I had probably one project that ended up being successful. And I think it really depends on, you know, whether or not you can obtain funding for the projects that you're putting into your specific research proposal. But I think what does remain similar is probably the flavor of the proposal and the kind of science that I was interested in. So even though the specifics might not have been the same, the overall vision for my research group remained pretty true. That's not saying that you can't change what you're doing. I think the faculty position, what we do is very flexible, and you do have to make sure that you are addressing things that are relevant and timely. So that will certainly change over 10 years, if not a shorter time period.
So similar to Andrea, I think I had 4 potential projects when I applied, and one of them took off really well. I think 6 of my first 10 papers were in on that project. And the other ones, one failed. The other 2 I never really tried. You know, I got my interest shifted over the months between when I wrote the application and when I actually hit the ground running. And so, so new projects came into being, and but yes, it is good to have, I think, a well laid out project that can lead to help you get a quick start. And I was grateful to have that one project that panned out very well.
To answer the question about whether you should do a postdoc before applying for a faculty position, I've been in the faculty position for 10 years, so I was doing other things for a long time before I decided to apply for a faculty position. So I think I got appointed to this position in my late 40s. So just so you know, they're really, you know, it's really up to you. And I can't even remember what I wrote in my research plans. I agree with Kane and Andrea. You need to be prepared to adapt, and the most important thing is, can you secure resources for research? I mean, our job is to train students in how to do research, and we need to be able to pay them, and so you have to be able to raise money, and so you have to adapt your ideas all the time. But again, as Andrea said, I would say that my general area that I'm still working on today is the same area that I've worked on for the last 10 or 15 years. Yeah.
Thank you. So a related question. So when you're writing your research plan for your application, how out there is acceptable? So this particular question comes from someone who had a specific skill set they acquired during their PhD, but wants to move to a parallel field. And they say the skill sets will transfer, but they're worried it'll be considered too inexperienced in the field they're transferring into to be successful. So Kane, if you want to start.
Sure. I think the fact that the skills transfer is important. That's something that the committee, search committee, will evaluate. You know, but then if it's really pretty far out there and you don't have any experience in it, I think the natural question would be, there'll be a lot of questions that will come about. You know, is it possible to get a postdoc, some postdoctoral experience in that area to kind of help pave the way a little bit? Would be you know, something I would ask now before you apply for faculty positions. So yeah, if the skills transfer are important, but still, you know, you may get some questions on that if we really can connect between what you know how to do over here and over in this adjacent field.
Any other comments? No?
I think there's always the question of feasibility when it comes to research proposals. And this might be where the choice of the department or university that you're looking at can play a critical role in whether or not you will be successful in your out there research ideas. For example, if you can find a department where there are experts in this field that you're entering into, or who can help you achieve, you know, what you're trying to do, or break into a new community, that can certainly be advantageous if you're proposing, you know, something that is truly visionary or, you know, extremely interdisciplinary. So that's something to consider as
well. Okay. So I'm now going to ask a question that's been very upvoted in the Q&A tab, which is how do the panelists predict the job market will be affected by the pandemic this year? And maybe Peter, we'll start with you and we can we'll go around.
Well, certainly at our school, this is a bit of a moving target. We are formally on a hiring freeze right now. So no new positions are being advertised. The way that, and again, this goes to Andrea's point about understanding the university system in the US. So Arizona State University is funded by the state of Arizona. And so we're looking at the state tax collections, so that will determine how much money the university gets. And initially there were very negative projections about state tax collections. Those are beginning to look a bit better. And so I would say that it's probably going to impact different schools around the country differently depending on how those schools are funded. And so I think that, again, you probably just have to keep an eye on the ads and the job market in order to see where hiring is occurring and where hiring is not.
I can jump in there too and say, you know, I'm at a private university. Vanderbilt is private, so you know, we're taking a close look at our endowment and what the 3-4 year effect of this pandemic is going to be on our endowment. And so right now there's pretty much, I would say, a freeze on hiring new positions, but I'm hearing not just here but at other places, universities are using it as a time to be strategic. If there's an area that they need to kind of ramp up the expertise in, hire a few key faculty in these areas, they're looking at the opportunity to do that because they feel that the competition out there is going to be a little bit lean with a few hiring freezes going on across the country. So there could be some opportunities. Definitely stay tuned to the announcements in your areas.
And I can follow up on what Peter and Kane just said. At UCSD, we are not currently on a hiring freeze, and I'm not sure if we have our official faculty hiring positions for the next year approved, however. But I do have to just give a word of hope for those of you who are applying for jobs. I was actually hired during the last recession, so back in 2008, 2009. And it was pretty bad then too. There were faculty searches that were just being canceled mid-search. And you would see things being posted, so advertisements that all of a sudden those positions would disappear. And I don't think we've started to see that yet. It seems to be a lot more stable than it was in the last recession. So maybe we've lived and learned, but I think things are still hopeful at this point.
Thank you. So there's another popular question, which is, what is the best way to see openings at material science departments? And does MRS have an online list? I will comment that MRS does have an online job board, but I believe it's very dependent on the school which job boards they actually use. So probably a more informative way would just, as an indication, if the panelists know where their school tends to post jobs, then that would be probably the best way just to answer this question. Unfortunately, I don't believe there's any list anywhere of all jobs. There's no one source, but if the panelists can comment maybe where their institutes actually post.
Yeah, I have to say I'm embarrassed that I'm not exactly sure. I know that we're usually involved in writing the job ad, and then it goes out to various listservs and locations around the country, and it also gets advertised digitally. I know that the MRS bulletin is one place that we would use, but there are many other bulletin boards as well. I suspect that many of the audience might know this better than me because they're used to watching there. So sorry.
So, I'm chair of a chemical engineering department, but we try to advertise our ads pretty broadly in some of the key places, and so those include chemical and engineering news, chemical engineering progress, the AICHE kind of things. I think we've also used MRS before to do that. Also, some of the websites as well, ACS, American Society for Engineering Education, the journal, and probably the website, as well as NSBE, in terms of other websites, and SHPE, those kind of Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers. Those sites we always try to put ads on.
Tom, if I could just jump in for a second, I'll note that a lot of people are posting websites in the chat room, so that's probably a good resource for people as well.
In addition to some of those broad advertisements in journals and online sites, I know the university itself, for example, UCSD has their own job posting lists specific to faculty searches. And so you can always go to the university specific HR site to see all of the faculty searches that are currently ongoing.
And just one other thing, I know that we frequently email our colleagues with advertisements, so that's probably the part that I'm usually most involved in, thinking about who might have postdocs or students that might be potentially qualified. So that's another, so you should ask your advisor or look in your department, or maybe people getting notices of jobs.
So another question, so are first author papers as seen as beneficial as first author papers?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's recognized. I think the concept of co-first author, as long as it's officially designated by the journal, I think is fine. We understand that there are sometimes publications where two people may have equal intellectual contributions. Yeah.
Okay. How important is it for your research plan to be a direct, indirect / indirect continuation of the work done during your PhD / postdoc? Maybe Andrea, do you want to?
Sure. I can only speak for the committees that I'm familiar with, but usually on those committees, we're looking for how the research proposal is actually new and differs from what that particular candidate did in their graduate and postdoc work. But also it's important to see the general research trajectory, to know that if someone is proposing something that is new, that they have the right skills, they have the right training, and the competency to actually carry out those ideas. So I think it's a mix of both, that you do want to propose something that is new, that can help set you apart from your advisors, but you also want to make sure that it's a feasible direction for you.
Okay, there's no other comments. What should we do when we do not have any teaching experience? I have done 2 postdocs in non-English speaking countries and was not given the opportunity to teach. So, Kane, if you want to step in first.
Sure. Certainly in your job application, your ideas and your passion for teaching can come through in the absence of real experience. And then if you get an interview, I'll second something Peter said during his presentation, is that that job talk needs to be an outstanding teaching talk. So this is something where you have a lot of people attending your job talk. Very few are going to be a true expert in what you're talking about. And so your job then is to really teach all the others there who are not an expert in this more about what you do, and get them excited about your field and your key findings. So you certainly can use that job talk to tell us that you are going to be or capable of being a really good teacher. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce that you know, teaching is communication. But in my case, maybe because I took a sort of non-traditional path to the faculty career, I didn't have teaching experience as well. And so what I did when I decided I thought I would pursue a faculty line, I actually taught part-time at community colleges simply to pad out my resume, because I knew that people would be looking on my resume for evidence of teaching in addition to research. So you have to maybe be creative and look for opportunities to do things. You know, just because you're not offered an opportunity to teach in your current position doesn't mean there may not be something outside that you can do on your own to demonstrate an interest in teaching. I think people are looking not just to see experience, but they want to see that you're motivated to help teach other people. And so that shouldn't just be part of your 9-to-5 type of job.
Kane and Peter said everything.
Okay, thank you. So another question. So can you be more specific about what to customize in an application? What are some things that tend to differ between positions that are otherwise similar? Maybe Peter would like to step in first.
Yeah, I mean, I was scanning the questions and answers, and I noticed there were some people as a resume or a CV, and you know, I would say that it's a dynamic CV is how I would probably describe that. So if you're thinking of, if the resume to you means a 1 or 2 page thing, that's not what you want for the faculty application. And then in terms of customizing, I think that, again, it comes back to the position that you're applying for. For example, in materials, we tend to bring in people that have degrees in physics, chemical engineering, mechanical engineering, chemistry. I mean, we bring in people that come in from a broad range of disciplinary backgrounds. And so we're looking to see, if you have a degree in physics, why are you interested in materials, becoming a material scientist, and how does that show up in your experience? And so your resume should reflect things that are relevant to a material science position. So that would mean bringing out particular skill sets that might be relevant to a material science position. It would mean making sure you highlight publications that are particularly relevant perhaps to the descriptions that are in the job. Usually when you're advertising a faculty position, sometimes they're completely broad, you just are looking for the best possible person in the field, but other times the faculty position, we're looking for a particular person to fill a particular niche. And so your resume needs to make sure that you emphasize that aspect that's being requested in the job description.
I would echo what Peter just said, to try to figure out from the job description what the department or the institution or university is looking for. And sometimes that can be quite difficult. Job descriptions and ads are written with very specific language, and it goes through various revisions, both from the faculty and the administrative level. So sometimes a lot of those specifics can get washed out. So if you know someone who knows someone on the hiring committee, that can often help you provide some perspective for a particular job search. But I would also suggest read the ad carefully to try to understand what that particular job search is trying to fill.
I think Peter and Andrea said it all.
Thank you. Another question, would committees look down upon a candidate who's getting far from their PhD? So for example, if they have a very extended postdoc.
I can start off with this one. I think it's very field dependent and also applicant dependent. Some fields, such as the biological sciences, the postdocs tend to be quite long. 4 years is considered average for a postdoc in biology. And so in chemistry, a 2-year postdoc is considered average. And in some engineering fields, no postdoc is considered pretty normal. So I think it's very field specific. And I think we touched upon this before with, potential postdocs in national labs or getting industry experience, that it really depends on what that experience brings to the table in terms of your research and your ability to operate as a faculty member.
In my field, I've seen just recently at my university successful candidates with postdocs ranging from 2 to 4 years, and I think Andrea is absolutely right that as you get into chemistry, biology, some of those, it might be a bit longer than that.
Yeah, I think that Kane and Andrea have stated the situation quite well. Yeah.
Cool. So when faculty and a candidate is preparing their application materials, how do people know what types of projects a funding agency is likely to fund?
I can start this one off. Sometimes it's difficult for current operating faculty members to figure that one out. My best advice for folks who are looking at what kinds of projects are fundable is to look at open calls from federal agencies. So for example, if you're interested in DoD funding, places like Air Force or Office of Naval Research will have open broad agency announcements, BAAs, where they list the areas that they're interested in finding faculty to work in. Also, you can look at National Science Foundation at the different programs and directives that are currently open and active. And don't be shy about contacting program managers to ask if a particular research direction would fit in with their program. So I think it's all about doing your homework ahead of time to understand, where a project might fit in.
And I'll add to that too. During the interview, when you present your future research, it really does look good if for each project you go through, if you have a few candidate funding agencies there, maybe the specific areas of those. And so definitely follow the advice Andrea just gave on that.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add from what I said in the lecture and what Andrea and Keen have said. Yeah. I think maybe the only thing I would warn, and I noticed there were comments on the Q&A about people from overseas applying and whether or not that's a disadvantage. I don't think it is. I think the key thing is, as Andrea said, to do your homework on how research is funded in the US. And it's all available on the website, so it doesn't matter whether you're living in the US or living somewhere else. You have to understand how to secure resources to support the projects that you're interested in initiating.
Okay. Thank you. Could the panelists comment on the importance of the candidates' PhD/postdoc university ranking? So if they've done postdocs or PhDs at particularly prestigious schools, does that increase their likelihood of success for faculty applications? Maybe.
What kind of ranking? There are all kinds of different rankings and lists that folks use for programs and universities. I think more importantly is probably who your advisors were when people are looking at where you come from, who your advisors are and what potentially departments. But rankings is somewhat arbitrary, I feel like, in the academic world, that you could probably find a ranking for almost any program in any department that will place you somewhere in the top 10. So
yeah, I'd say your publication record and your ideas and your research plans are very important to us, more so than the university you got, or you get your PhD or your postdoc at, and that's even more so to us than maybe who it was with. We want to look at that first. If you have great ideas, great publication record, and you worked with someone terrific, that's even better.
Yeah, just one discussion that often happens in committees, if we have, say, a candidate that comes from a highly ranked school, say whatever that means, from maybe a super group, for example, someone working for an advisor that's very famous. The question that often comes up there is, if you take that person out of that super group at that fabulous school, can they do anything on their own? Are they able to actually do anything on their own, or is it all a consequence of being in this sort of highly charged environment with this high energy advisor that everyone gets 10 papers working in this group? So I think people are always aware of that, and again, it really comes down to what are you able to do on your own, and from that point of view, that's the thing that we're really trying to evaluate the most. I mean, I've seen applicants come in from fabulous backgrounds who have really not been very successful, and on the other hand, I've seen people come up from less well-known schools that have been highly successful. So it all comes back to the individual.
Okay, so one thing I just wanted to know, actually following up on just a previous question, is Kanan mentioned knowing the conferences and kind of different events that are facilitated at the conferences. One of the things actually that the Early Career Engagement Subcommittee is looking to do, and we ran this for the first time last year, is have a poster session for faculty candidates to try and give another opportunity for candidates to promote themselves. We're hoping to run this every year, of course, with the pandemic and MRS fall and conferences being maybe or maybe not. The format of this, certainly this year, is we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but the plan is to continue moving, to have this as a new program that we're starting in the materials field. Okay, so another question is, many schools, and I can speak to this from experience, have a research seminar and then a separate chalk talk. So instead of putting both talks in one, they'll actually split them into two. So, which was not explicitly addressed in the presentation. So do you have any advice when you have these two separate talks and how you might change that part of the interview preparation?
Yeah, I can take this one. So that's exactly what we do. We have what we call the job talk, first off. That's just basically your prior research and your successes there. And then we have a separate, again, the job talk is for everyone to attend. Anyone, and graduate students, even some undergrads could be there, all the faculty, other departments could come. It's really a public talk. But then we have what we call, we call it the chalk talk, and that's kind of misleading because it's not really a chalkboard or anything like that. But it is a presentation of your future research, your projects that you're planning to undertake. And the thing about the chalk talk, I think, is really important in our format is that there are a lot of questions, Q&A, big time in the chalk talk. I mean, it's hard to even get any momentum going sometimes in a chalk talk because you'll have questions just from and it's just the faculty. The only ones there, but we're usually in some kind of smallish room, and just be prepared. At least the way we do it, there's a lot of dialogue in that kind of environment. So if you've prepared for 50 minutes for a chalk talk, you may only get through 15 of those minutes. There'll be quite a bit of dialogue.
Our faculty searches operate very similar to what Kane just described. We have a separate chalk talk, which is in reality, you do get PowerPoint slides, and it's usually over the lunch hour, so you might be hungry during that time, which might add to your stress level. But it is more of an open discussion about your research. You will get a lot of questions. It's almost like a small defense of sorts, a defense of your proposal ideas. And part of that is just to see how you think about your research and how you interact with your colleagues. So, you know, as a faculty on a search committee, we're always looking for people to interact with on a scientific level and a collegial level. And so if you can show that you can do that during your chalk talk, I think that's always a plus, a benefit.
Maybe I can just add that we probably maybe 75% of our searches don't use the chalk talk format and 25% do. It kind of depends a little bit on the chair of the committee. It's up to the committee chair to decide. It's not decided at the department or college level. And that's why the most important thing if you're invited for an interview is to communicate with the chair of the committee, and they'll be able to tell you how to divide the material up between, say, a seminar and a chalk talk type of activity.
Thank you. So just coming back to the fact that most faculty members will scan an application first to decide whether they're going to kind of review it in more detail. What's the most important things that they're going to be looking at when they're looking at that quick scan? Is it just things like formatting, or might there be specific things they're targeting, like types of journals published or similar? Kane, if you want to start.
Yeah, I'll be glad to start. So I think you know, what Peter said is absolutely right. You have a lot of applications, and the committee may be 4 or 5 people, and so it would take a whole work week essentially to go through all those if we read every word. So yeah, we are going to focus in on a few key things. For me, I will glance through the cover letter just to see if there's anything that specifically the candidate really wanted to emphasize in that cover letter. Then I want to look at the CV. I want to see the publication record. I want to see the kind of the areas where the papers have had their impact, the journals, the quality of the journals, and those kinds of things. And then I want to see the research direction. Just get an idea if the papers and the research direction are at least compatible in some sense there, and also if that research direction is something that works for us. We're a smaller department, 14 tenured track faculty, so we kind of usually have an idea of the kind of person, the area of the research that would really fit in well with us. So that's something that you know, we look at pretty quickly in the application. And then if everything is looking pretty good, I'm going to look at the teaching quickly and see what the experiences are there, what the ideas are on the teaching, and I probably can get through an application then in you know, 5 to 8 minutes. By focusing in on those areas.
There's no other comments. We'll move on. At interview, is it rude to ask about the tenure process and like the faculty mentoring process? Is it also okay to ask about administrative load and details such as overheads, access to shared equipment, kind of these kinds of more technical details?
I can start this one off. It is absolutely not rude, and you should be asking those questions. You should be asking about the tenure process, whether or not, you know, there's a mentoring infrastructure in place for young faculty, what your teaching load is, access to equipment, and whether that's going to be supplied in your startup or whether there are user facilities. All of these things are fair game during the interview process, and you should be gathering that information. Sometimes that information doesn't always come from the same place though. So in some cases, the chair of the department will have more knowledge about teaching load, administrative load, space allocation, things like that. And sometimes it might be helpful to talk to colleagues in the department where you're interviewing that have similar research areas to find out about equipment, perhaps university resources like user facilities that maybe your chair or other folks don't know about because it's run at the university level. So part of that is information gathering, and it'll come from the various people that you talk to during your interview process. But absolutely, all of those questions are good and fair game.
I agree.
Yeah, remember that even though you think you're being interviewed, but actually you're interviewing the university as well. And remember that when we make offers to people, you know, our offers are not always accepted. So it's kind of by the time you get to the interview level, as long as you don't make any huge mistakes in the process, it's kind of a dialogue, I would say, rather than, you know, thinking of it as being unequal. And you might decide after what you hear, even if they offer you the job, that they're not interested. So it's definitely, you want to gather as much information as you can about the position to make sure that it feels right to you.
Piggybacking on what Peter just said, I think some of the worst candidate interviews that I've been on have involved folks who just don't seem interested because they don't ask enough questions about the position and about the university. So being polite, if you think you're being rude by asking a question, can sometimes backfire. So you do want to ask those questions and show interest.
So another question related to the pandemic is, do you think it's likely to be possible to get a faculty position after a year gap? So gaps in employment or a gap in maybe research output, would it still be possible to get a faculty position?
Yes, I think so. That's a year gap. I mean, to me, that's part of it. That's all fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would say about when people are looking at resumes, I think you want to make sure you describe what you've done all the time. I think what people feel uncomfortable about is if there's a period in a year or two in a resume where there's just nothing there. There's no comment. If you decide to go off and explore the world for 6 months, I mean, I don't think any of us are going to view that as a negative. That doesn't mean you can't be a productive and creative faculty member. I think you just want to make sure that the time during that gap that you explain what you're doing, and you know, people take time off for many reasons. So I think it's okay.
Okay. So can you comment on how much the reference and recommendation letters play in the recruitment process? So how important are they?
I'd say for us, we are probably not looking at the letters of recommendation until we have a semi-final list of maybe 20 to 30 candidates. And somewhere along there, that's when we want to be clear that if the letters aren't uploaded or something like that, we go to the candidate and we say we want to see your letters at this point. So then it's really important to us going from that list of 20 to 30 down to maybe the final 10, and then from the final 10 to maybe 5 that we interview. The letters do come in, and we read every one of them. At that screening process.
I agree with what Kane just said. It's usually when we have down selected to our 4 or 5 candidates that we make sure all the letters are in, and those letters get distributed to the entire department at that point. It's not just the selection committee. So everyone is reading those letters. And trying to get a gauge on, whether or not you're fit for the job, and, what your previous advisors think of you as a scientist and as a colleague.
Yeah, maybe just one thing to add. I agree with what Kane and Andrea said. I think that by the time we get to that short list, I mean, I think the letters are often just used to check that our evaluation of the information that's been presented, that there's not anything that's, there's not an inconsistency. So I mean, the letters are important, but I don't want to overstate the letters. I think that very often they're a confirmation that, yeah, this really is someone that we should be talking to. And then, you know, as I say, once you get to the telephone interview or the in-person interview, I think, again, everything is on how well the candidate does at that point, rather than what someone might write about them in a reference letter.
Thank you. Thank you. So when you have second or third author papers, is there a way to properly kind of sell your knowledge on those papers where you're maybe not the primary author? So even if you made a major contribution, especially if it's a substantial piece of work, you might have made a significant contribution, but still only be second author. So is there a way to effectively leverage that in your application?
I mean, I may have triggered that comment with my comment in the, I mean, I didn't mean to imply that being third or fourth author is not important. And we understand that there are big projects where many people come together and work as a team, and that's important, that it demonstrates a team player. So I think the committee will be able to interpret that. I don't think you need to worry about having papers on your resume where you're third or fourth author. My main comment in the presentation was to understand and stress the importance of also having first author papers. It's not that we expect all your papers to be first author.
Cool. Thank you. Another question, and as we're getting towards the end of the session now, should an applicant change their research plan significantly for each faculty position they apply to?
I can answer that one. I don't think it's necessary. I think if you have a clear vision of what you want to do in your independent work, you should find the right university and the right department that can support you. And so if that's the case, and if you have a research vision that you feel strongly about, why would you change it? I think you should stick to it, unless for some reason, if you can only get a particular project done at a particular place, then maybe you might want to tailor it. But I would say it's absolutely fine to keep the same research plan for your various application packages.
I agree with that. Keep the same research plan.
Another question: is there an annual cycle for applications? For example, a seasoning where openings are posted. Which I can certainly answer that there is, in that it tends to be, you tend to start sometime in the summer and end sometime in the fall. However, it widely varies, actually, depending on the specific schools you're targeting. Having just gone through the cycle. So I was applying for jobs with deadlines in early September or even August, and I was also applying for jobs with deadlines in January. And I suspect the panelists will agree that that tends to be the case for their schools. Okay.
Yeah, I'll add, Tom, I'll say that, since we use the annual meeting in chemical engineering so much, we want to get our ads out by August, and we want to be reviewing applications in maybe early to mid-October to mid-November, and then the meeting is usually somewhere around mid-November. So we want to be ahead of that game. So someone that comes in with an application after mid-November, it just may not get the same level of scrutiny or views of our committee that it would if it came in September, October.
Okay, so another question which How important is networking during the job search so reaching out to departments for faculty positions, either before they've been advertised or after they've been advertised?
I can start this one. So I'm just looking at the original question, and I think they were mentioning LinkedIn as one way of connecting. I would say a cold email or a cold message through LinkedIn is probably not the best way to network, but if you know someone who's in that department, or know someone who's on the search committee, and you would like to have more information about what the department's actually looking for, or what that position is actually being advertised to fill. Maybe there needs to be someone who is capable of teaching a chemical engineering course that year, or they're looking to fill a particular research gap in the department's portfolio. So that's always helpful, I think, from the applicant's perspective. But it's certainly not necessary, I think, to reach out through places like LinkedIn to network. I'm not sure if that would put your application necessarily above someone else's, unless there's an organic connection that can be made.
Any other comments?
I mean, I agree with what Andrea said. I would say that if you're looking at 200 or 300 applications, I'm not really sure what kind of networking activity the person has in mind. I think finding out about what the requirements of the job are, maybe talking to someone might be useful, but I think, emailing the committee or the department head, I don't really think those cold emails will have any impact at all. Yeah.
Another question, which kind of I know is growing in importance, which I know, especially in the UC system, is becoming more important, is the diversity and inclusion statements, and really what is looked for in those diversity and inclusion statements.
Yeah, I can certainly take this one. So yes, like I said before, diversity, equity, inclusion is now a fourth pillar of our faculty job, in addition to research, teaching, and service. And at the hiring stage, what we're looking for are people who have made an impact in that area. And that impact can be very broad. It can be, potentially you've mentored students, undergraduates or graduate students, from underrepresented groups in your particular area, or you've participated in communication workshops, or you've been part of groups like SHPE and other organizations, or through MRS. So we're typically looking for just any impact that's made, but especially ones at a leadership level are useful and tend to stand out. There are some searches that are very specific to the diversity, equity, and inclusion requirements. I know in the past years we've had searches that are labeled specifically for those areas. So I mentioned at the start of our panel that we actually had a search that was subject to a different committee that was held at the school-wide level. So the department was not the sole organization making the decision for the faculty hiring, and that was part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion search. So they wanted to make sure that all of our faculty candidates were meeting this DEI requirement. But again, that requirement can be very broadly interpreted. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, we don't have the California system is ahead of many other schools, I think, in this as a requirement. It's not a requirement for the application process at Arizona State University, but I can tell you that the faculty are very sensitive to these issues at the moment. So in fact, I can think of a search this year for a fairly strong candidate. Their application went down because of some inappropriate comments that were made that I think really negatively bias the faculty against that particular candidate. So it's a really important issue now. People are really taking it important, and so you really have to pay attention to that and have some good answers when people ask you. So even though it's not part of the application process, certainly for the in-person interviews, there are lots of questions about the candidate's commitment to diversity and inclusion.
I agree with what Andrea and Peter have said. It's very, very important, growing in importance as we move forward.
Okay. Thank you very much. At this point, I think we're reaching our time. So I'd like to bring a close to this session. I would like to say, I know there's kind of the Q&A section has ballooned. So there's a lot of questions from which kind of come from a very wide range of topics. The questions that we have not directly addressed, we will review them and try and address them in another way, maybe either through an email or use them to influence future programming. So there may be, there's a lot of other events that the early career engagement faculty, the subcommittee are planning. So there's events at MRS Fall, like the poster session, but there's also a whole kind of session on early careers and early career development. We're also developing other resources continuously. So these questions, even if we didn't get them today, hopefully they'll be answered soon through one of our other channels. So I hope you have found this session interesting. I'd like to give special thanks to Peter and Andrea and Kane for giving their time today and their insight into the application process. I'd also like to thank the MRS staff for hosting the webinar and the members of the Early Career Subcommittee for organizing the webinar series. So at this point, I think Bob will hand back to you.